Namaste yogis, my name's Abigail, and this short video is just a little sneak peek as to what the beginner series will entail in terms of using props. So one of the challenging and perhaps overwhelming aspects of yoga is that there are often a lot of props involved, and learning how to use them and use them safely and use them effectively is part of the learning process, especially as a new student to yoga. So this video is really just going to show you a couple of things as to how to use the blocks, sort of what the blocks entail in terms of different sizes, a couple of blankets. I'll show you a couple different ways to use those, and then the belt or yoga strap will be the third piece of equipment or tool that we'll work with in this video. There's also opportunities in many yoga classes to utilize a wall, and so we'll get into a few ways to do that in this short video as well as in my online beginner series. So the first thing is yoga blocks. These come in a couple of different sizes. You can buy them in all sorts of places, but generally speaking, the yoga block is solid enough that we could put weight on it, and it has three sides. So the flattest setting would be this short setting of the block with the flat facing up. So first setting or flat setting. Second side is this second setting with a little bit of more height, and the block would sit maybe horizontally this way. And then the tall setting is when the block stands like a tower, or the third side being the shortest edge facing up. So the block essentially has those three different faces or three different settings, and we can use them in various ways. So one of the ways we can use blocks is to lift the back of the pelvis, a common pose in yoga, and especially for beginners, it's such a lovely pose, is supported bridge. So you'll be on your back, and the easiest way to get into this is to bend your knees. You'll hold your two blocks on that short setting. So the tall third setting that I showed, the short side. Push into your feet, lift your hips up, and then you can slide one block, maybe. Rest the pelvis, see how that feels for a couple of breaths. Block on its flattest setting, running horizontally across the back of the pelvis, or really the lowest part of your spine, so right on the sacrum. And then after maybe several breaths, you could slip the other block underneath, push into your feet, lift your hips, and then we've got this really nice stable setup of block on block, flat setting on flat setting, or that very first setting I showed. And then we can tuck our shoulders and spin the palms to face up for this nice supported bridge shape. So we get a nice big opening across the front of the body, supported back bend. And you could hang here for several breaths, of course. The exit is the same, so you'll just grab one or both blocks with each hand, push into your feet, lift your hips, and then you can slide your blocks out, lower the pelvis to the floor, and then just let your knees knock together, rest your hands on your belly. Another nice way to use a block is an item to squeeze. So next setting to show is block between the inner legs. So you'll squeeze a block really whatever at distance of your hips feels safest. Really about hip distance setup. So depending on how wide your pelvis is, you might have to change. But I'm on the flat setting, the first setting of the block on each side of my inner leg, and I've got a good squeeze on it. And then we can work some really simple but effective core work here by simply just hovering the shins parallel to the ceiling and squeezing nicely into the block. So the inner thighs work, the pelvic floor works a little bit. And as there's potential for more maybe challenge or progression in the pose, you could take your feet a little bit further away so your knees are not quite over your hips. And then we just hold and breathe all the while. Nice squeeze in around your block. And then you could do that for several breaths. Bring the block out, set it to the side, and pause. So the next thing I'll show with the blocks is the setups for some kneeling shapes. So one of the nice ways to use your blocks and your blanket, I'll show more about the blanket in a second, but knee padding is nice with the use of a blanket here. And then you can kneel on that and take a block in each hand on the short setting. So very tall setting of the block in each hand. And we'll take a step to the right, setting up for Parigasana variation, or the gate pose. So we'll step that right foot to the right. And this tall block just wedges right inside my right foot. I can set this other block to the side. So this is a really good place for my right hand as I side bend over to the right. So this allows me to, instead of reaching for the floor and rounding forward, the block allows me to lift through my side body, through my chest. And then I can really open up and turn and get more of the side bend and the open twist component in this particular shape. So you can take a few breaths here and squeeze right arm and right knee together so there's connection there. Same available option is with the outer foot, so you can switch sides if you're kind of following along and doing with me, is to set the block outside of the foot. Same idea. We'll lean over to the block, left hand on it, so that my left side can stay super lifted, right hand to hip as I roll my chest open, allowing the floor to be a little bit higher, keeping my torso, my chest nice and lifted and open. All right, let's change so you can release your gate shape. Another nice use for the blocks is in some seated shapes. And so if the teacher says sit in Virasana or Vajrasana, it's essentially from your knees. And you can set blocks on flat settings. So that very first setting, maybe one, maybe stack one on top of another, and you get this really tall, stable seat to work with. So then you could sit here for a handful of breaths, and maybe there's instruction on some shoulder work, or the teacher's talking about upper body things. But your base, your sitting bones are really well supported by your blocks. The same is the case if there's like squats or deep sitting happening and the legs are out in front of you. It's hard to get your bum to the floor, which is definitely common. So you could play with what setting of the block works underneath the sitting bones in the garland pose or some squat variation. So the blocks are just a really nice way to lift the floor a little bit higher, allowing us to have more accessibility to a handful of poses. So the next thing I'd like to show with the blocks are more standing postures, and it's similar to the kneeling work where the floor is essentially being lifted towards us, but you can stand just briefly and step wide for a nice wide forward fold. So in this case, toes will stay facing forward. Your block, or plural, both blocks can come in front of you, and you can lower like heels of hands to blocks, or that singular setup. So then instead of like rounding, schlumping, I can use my block to push and lengthen my spine in this nice wide forward fold. So again, just bringing the floor closer to us. Maybe I can eventually lower down and make it more of a forward fold, continuing to still use my blocks. Same goes for standing lateral shapes. So setting up like a Trikonasana, tall block is almost always what I do, holding on that tall setting outside of the foot for Trikonasana. Really nice way to keep this underside waist nice and lifted. And you can do the other side for symmetry purposes. So finding a nice lift through, I'm even on my fingertips on the left, so I can get even taller, longer through my left side. And then you can come out of there, come up to stand. So just like we did on our backs briefly, that core work, it's another really good place here for a block. Standing like Tadasana or the mountain pose, there's a really good time here to really hug and squeeze around the block. And this allows us to really drop the tail, pull the pubic bone up, and really lift up through the pelvic floor, lift up through the side waist, and we get this nice active Tadasana or mountain pose. So lots of opportunities to squeeze the block. There's obviously ways to squeeze like between your feet. So lots of different ways to create adduction or hug of the midline with your blocks. The other thing I'll show with the blocks is in other variations of forward folds. So if we are working like pyramid pose, the blocks are on their tall setting, right underneath my shoulders, and I can keep a nice long spine, maybe bend my elbows, lower to a different setting of the blocks, and breathe a couple of breaths there. So really the blocks, they might be the best. They might be the best prop that we have to be able to stay lifted and maybe lower again to smaller setting. So there's lots of ways to flip them, which is nice as well. One of the last things I'll show here is with the block, you can sit for this one, so feel free to sit on a block, is with squeezing but more for the arms. You could squeeze the block on that tall setting, so tall setting, both palms on it, and you'll squeeze it between your hands and take it up overhead. So this is a really nice way to work through the triceps and the shoulders and the chest. We can bend the elbows, squeeze the block at that 90-degree bend, squeeze the block overhead, and work the hug of the arms in as well. Last thing I'll show with blocks is seated twists. So I'm sitting on one on a flat setting horizontally. The other one's going to go behind me on the second setting. And then I can twist to the left by having a nice grounded seat on one block and then having the second block behind me to put my hand on and twist. So there's an inhale for length and an exhale to turn. We get this nice lifted sense from the very root of the pelvis all the way up through the spine. And you can switch sides, go the other way, so there's evenness to the right. In this case, I'd put my right hand on the block and turn. And then you can come back through center. Real final one with the blocks is lunging. So blocks again are going to be able to lift the spine, the torso, higher in the framing of the front foot in a lunge. So in this case, I'm on the tall setting, and it allows me to put my hands on blocks to push and lift my chest up. And then I'm able to be really tall here. I could stay here for quite a bit and hold, stretch front of my left thigh. And you can switch sides, do the other one. So again, the block's just allowing us to lift. All right, so we'll ditch the blocks, although there's a good chance they'll come back to our setups. So the other prop I'd like to work with for a few moments is a blanket. So if you have a traditional yoga blanket, it opens up to this obviously very large blanket situation. And if you fold it one time, it creates this nice fold that would cover the exact length of your fitness mat or your yoga mat, your exercise mat, so that the blanket then is over it. And oftentimes in practice, especially at One Tree, we practice a fair amount of supine, side lying, and belly down work that has a little bit of slippage to it, has a little bit of slidey, glidey business to it. And if you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about, try out our classes and you'll see that this work is really fluid, and the blanket allows us some slippage. So more than likely your yoga mat is like sticky, which is great when we're doing standing postures and we're doing postures where we need to be able to stabilize and be strong. But in other cases, when we're on our backs or on our sides, we want to be able to slide and move, and the blanket allows that in this particular setup, which we will definitely do in the beginner series. So if I say cover your mat with a blanket, you can cover it like this with a traditional yoga blanket if it happens to be something you have. If you don't, that's totally fine. Just find a blanket that you're okay with covering your whole yoga mat, and it will have the same effect. So you can come to lay down on your setup here. We'll just take a moment to just kind of feel what the slippage fluid movement maybe feels like. So you can lay down, take your legs long, and then just roll your right thigh to the right. So roll your right toes, your right knee, your right hip to the right. It's an external rotation of the right hip. Keep that and use your blanket to slide your right foot up towards your left inner leg. So we find ourselves with the right knee poking to the right, and then you'll just slide the leg back out. So there's no actual pickup of the leg. There's just a roll out of the thigh. So turn your right toes, right knee, right hip to the right, and then use your blanket to slide that outer right foot up into or towards the groin area, like the sole of your right foot would face your left inner thigh. And then you slide the leg foot back out. Again, there's no picking up happening, it's just slidey action. Let's do the left side. Roll your left toes to the left, as well as your left knee and your hip. And then keep that sort of external rotation and slide your left outer foot up any amount. Your left knee will poke out to the left. Now we've got the left sole of the foot trying to face the right inner thigh. Don't pick anything up, just slide your left outer foot on the blanket. And then roll the hip externally. Left hip, knee and toes turn to the left. Come to that outer left foot as you slide the outer left foot up. Sole of left foot tries to face right inner leg. Your left knee opens to the left. And then don't pick anything up and just slide your left leg long. Pause here. Interlace your hands behind your head. Let's show one move in the upper body here. Poke your elbows wide to the sides. And then you're not going to move anything in terms of picking it up. So head and torso won't actually do this. There's no lifting up, picking up. You're just going to slide. So slide your head, your torso to the right. Pull your right elbow down and your left elbow up overhead. And then you'll slide back through center and switch. Slide to the left. Left elbow down, right elbow up. So simple side to side supine, side bending. Go back to the first side. Don't pick anything up. Just let everything loosey-goosey slide side to side. And in some cases, we would match this movement with our breath, or we would hang out for a few breaths. So go one more time each way. Try not to effort too much. Let the blanket do the work. And then you can come back through center, release your hands, take a pause. And then you can bend your knees, let's roll and come up. So that's one of the bigger settings of the blanket, commonly used. Especially, we'll be using it quite a bit like that in the beginner series. So the next setting for props with the blanket is from the setting we just had the blanket in, so it was covering your whole mat. You'll just fold it in half one time. So now it's still a rectangle, but half of that size. And from the side, if you have a traditional yoga blanket, you'll roll it from the non-fringy frayed side. So roll from the folded side, non-frayed side. So you end up with this really nice blanket roll up, or it looks like a tube. And you've got this really lovely roll to work with in a handful of shapes. So one of the first things I'll show with this is supported under the upper back. So sometimes we'll use this blanket roll to lift the chest. So you'll lay on it and open up nice lifted torso chest situation. Other ways to use this for the upper body is to side lie, so like the widest part of your ribs gets a really nice massage, nice opening on the right side. And if you're doing it along with me, you can roll to the left, so the left widest part of your rib cage gets a little space, and then, you know, if there's a side body practice, we might do some stuff here. So that's just a couple of ways in the upper body. Lower body this is a really nice support for Shavasana. So being supine for a lot of us doesn't feel very good, especially with long straight legs. So oftentimes you can slide this roll up behind your thighs or behind your knees, and then take a supported Shavasana with the blanket roll. Final thing with the blanket roll is it works as a really lovely calf masher. So you would put the roll up right on top of your calves and sit on it. This is a little bit more of a fascia release. So there's some digging potential into the calves, and you can move it back like towards your heels, stretch out through the Achilles. So the blanket surprisingly provides quite a bit of opening for the body when we use it like this. So those are just a couple of ways with the roll up. Let's unroll it so we are back to this fold. And then you can fold it once. So now it's still a rectangle but smaller. And this is typically how I have people set up for knee down support, so that if you were to kneel on it, you have support for your shins, maybe all the way down to like the inner shin. Maybe if you have longer legs, like mid shin. I'm pretty short, so this covers me pretty much to my ankle. But this is really nice for kneeling support. And when we do side lateral support, you've got potential for even more space when we turn to this long edge of the mat. So that fold is almost, I'd say, preferred. You can go even smaller to this really narrow rectangle. Some people like to kneel on that, work their lunges supported from this. It's pretty thick, so if you've got really sensitive knees, it's a really nice support for lunges especially. The other nice thing about the blanket in this fold is it makes for a lovely seat. So you can sit on it for seated postures like Dandasana, legs in front of you. When we work into forward folds, you can sit on this nice lift so you're at the front edge of it to fold right or left or forward, whatever the practice is. So the blanket really provides a tilt of the pelvis forward, so that when we do round, there's some integrity for the spine and not a ton of schlumping. So the blanket really is a nice support for seated meditation, seated postures, and potentially can be used as your supported Shavasana shapes, supported restful shapes. So in that same fold, you could slide it out from underneath you, slide it behind your thighs. Can work as a low bridge support, slide it behind the sacrum. There are so many ways to use props. I'm just showing kind of the basics. That is the blanket. Actually, there's one other thing I'll show, because we'll be using the blanket like this in the online beginner series. So open it back up to this fold, so that second rectangle, and you'll fold it in a third. So fold it in. I did this in one of my other videos too. So you fold it in a third. Take this other flap, fold it behind, so it's like an accordion, and you've got what looks like now the potential use for like a pillow, or in the breathing exercises we'll be using this as our support for the upper back, eventually on our sides, and then on the belly for the belly breath. So it's like an accordion style fold for your blanket. Okay, last thing with props is the strap, and I showed a fair amount of this in the very first video that I provided about the beginner series, and in that video we had the use of a strap for supine forward folds or Supta Padahustasana. We can stretch the back of the leg here, the feet, the toes, all of that goodness. So check out that other video if you didn't see any of that. So lovely way to use the strap as an arm extender. Other ways to use the strap include shoulder flossing or shoulder work. So you can open up a strap, hold it wide, and take like seated side bends, pulling. You can take the strap and take it behind you, get into the chest. So it allows us to pull. Other great ways to use the strap is for the opposite action of the block, which is abduction or abduction. And so in this case, we would make a loop with our strap that's about shoulder distant, and I've got it just below my elbows, and we might work like shoulder engagement. Same action that we did with the block earlier, arms overhead. So we get that opening, strengthening of the shoulders. So example in the arms, same is the true for the legs. So you could strap in your thighs. And if you don't have a traditional yoga strap with the clicker, you might have like a strap with the 2 rings. That is totally fine. But in this case, we'd strap the thighs, break the strap side to side, allows us to feel and engage the outer line of the legs in Tadasana. Nice way to firm against the strap there. Other uses for the strap include the use of the strap in standing postures. So in this case, you would make like a super long loop. I might ask you to stand in it, and you can hook it over your ankle. Use the strap to sort of pull on as we maybe side bend or something. So the strap is a really nice way to pull and find potential for stretch. The other thing big with the straps is shoulder work. So you might use it for shapes like Gomukhasana if we're stretching the triceps, Maybe your hands can't quite touch, so you would use your strap here to make connection. And if some of these poses are like, yeah, I don't know any of these, or not entirely sure what she's talking about, definitely come to the beginner series and you will learn all of these with the use of props. So the strap allows us to, similar to the blocks, how the floor, the blocks bring the floor up to us, the strap creates more length for us. So those are just some of the general ways to use the strap. The last thing I think I'll mention is the use of the wall. So one of the best ways to use the wall is for pushing action. And so you might be asked to like down dog at the wall, and you would like push your hands into the wall, fold in half. Another really good way to use the wall is for twisting. And so your teacher might ask you to sit a certain distance from the wall so that you could touch it with your fingertips, and then we could take a twist, touch the wall, turn, rotate using the push available from the wall. And you can do the other side. One of the beginner level poses that's lovely at the wall, as well as with the use of a strap, is legs up the wall. You've maybe heard of that one. It's a restorative shape. So just to kind of show how you could use all sorts of props, is you could strap your feet maybe about hip distant, take a block or two or one of your blankets, get your booty close to the wall, and you can fling your legs up. You could prop the back of your pelvis, so there's some lift there, and then arms overhead loose. And the strap just holds my legs in place so they don't slide out. The block helps me stay lifted, and then I've got the wall for support. We will definitely do this pose in the online beginner series. So feel free to give all of these a try. And if you're wanting to learn more, this is just like the basics, some of the most popular ways to use props, but there are so many ways to use props. And one of the things that I firmly believe in with this online beginner series is how important it is that we know how to use the tools that we have. And even if you don't have like a traditional yoga block or a fancy yoga strap, you can use things in your home. You don't have to go buy anything to make this work. So you could use like a dog leash for a strap, tall stacks of books for blocks. I've heard of some people using like tall soup cans or jugs, so things that allow you to lift the floor. Blankets are easily replicated in your home. Same thing with like pillows or other support that you need as you practice. Like, use what you have. If you're not interested or able to purchase things, that is totally fine. I will definitely be available to make the practice work with what you have, whether that's your props or what you've got in your body. So I look forward to offering the series. It starts very soon, October 1st. So this coming Saturday, if you're watching this video pretty early on in the week. But I would love to have you, and if you have questions, please reach out to me or One Tree, and we will answer them and help you out. Namaste.